oh boy, what do I
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
Deer in the headlights, and which kind of triggers that fight or flight response, right? Because
Yep.
fear has entered the equation. Uncertain,
That's right.
at least uncertainty, and so much uncertainty is rooted in fear, or vice versa. Fear rooted in uncertainty, one way or the other. But that idea that the unknown, the uncertainty, what happens next, can start to stir up fear, and fear. I think the world has told us fear is a great motivator. Maybe there's some truth to that. But what fear does is it often causes us to make hasty decisions, decisions we wouldn't otherwise make. And so I think part of what I want to explore with you today, too, is how can we help and equip our listeners to avoid making hasty decisions? So, healthy avoidance.
Welcome to the Christ-Centered Stewardship Podcast with your hosts, Maria Casillas and Nino Villa. Christ-Centered Stewardship is a ministry of new money habits designed to equip believers to steward everything God has given them, including their time, talent, and treasure in ways that bring Him honor, glory, and praise. You can join our growing community on Facebook and submit your questions to podcast at newmoneyhabits.com. Now, to begin today's episode, here is Maria Casillas and Nino Villa.
Maria, today I wanted to address something that I'm definitely seeing a trend, an upward tick in like our social media groups around the idea about all of the economic stuff that we're facing. But I want to ground it and root it in a scripture for us real quick. In Proverbs, it reads in 21:5, good planning and hard work lead to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty. And the trend that I'm noticing is with the way the economy is, things seem to be getting tighter and tighter and tighter, almost like a pressure cooker. And so this can lead to some hasty decisions financially because we may be growing in uncertainty and certainly some panic might be settling in.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I also want to say that I see that even when it doesn't seem to be a trend, like each individual economy is just that. It's an individual economy. So whether this is something that's happening across the board or something that's just happening in somebody's life, it can absolutely feel like that pressure cooker. And we go to that point where like, I got nothing. I don't know what to do now. And so where do we go? In fact, I was just sitting yesterday at my sister's house and she was explaining to me that one of her really close friends, just as close to them, that they are in this moment of, you know what, I think we've got to declare bankruptcy. And it was a very surprising statement to my sister, who again is very close friends with this individual, because on the outside it didn't look like that. They lived a certain way and everything just seemed okay. And so when this was told, it was like, oh, I had no idea that was going on in the background. And I don't know the whole situation, but with what little bit they shared with me, I think that it really kind of felt more like that panicky decision making, like we don't really know what else to do. And so I think this is the thing that's going to give us some of that short-term relief. And I think it might give some short-term relief, but does the short-term relief outweigh that long-term wisdom of what's going to happen as we really look down the road? And I can say that it won't if there's no behavior change. I don't know whether it will if there's a behavior change or not, because I don't know enough of that story. But I do think that that's something that's happening for a lot of people when they're thinking about this. I think human nature is to protect ourselves. We want to avoid pain. That's what we do. That's why our bodies are built the way we are. You go and touch a hot stove, and it's built to say, move your hand off of that stove. So are we making some decisions in this panic mode of, let's say, I'm just trying to move my hand off the stove, give me that instantaneous relief, without recognizing what is that going to do later on?
As you're sharing this story, it's a very familiar story. I have a close loved one who very similarly was on the outside, it looked like everything was okay, only to learn that later on she was actually in a much tighter position and a much more volatile position that led to some rapid decisions. But what I noticed about that situation, and as you're sharing your story, I can't help but wonder, how long are people kind of suffering in silence before they finally raise the alarms?
Yeah.
And this hits really close to home, not just because I had a loved one go through it, but I've gone through these seasons where there's been financial uncertainty, and then it leads to the possibility of hasty decisions. And it's not something that grows out of a situation overnight. It is, maybe somebody's been laid off for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. I even saw it in some of the posts that I was reading through on our groups in preparation for this conversation. And I saw it time and time again where somebody was laid off. They turned to credit cards to help them survive. And now they're getting to the point where they've maxed those out. And it's like, what other relief? What other things are there? And so I couldn't help but start wondering how many people kind of suffer in silence, and then they find themselves making this decision. So maybe it's not as hasty as it seems on the surface. It's more of a desperation Hail Mary at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. A lot of times when you say like suffer in silence, that to me says it's something that people are kind of avoiding. And so I think that is another response that people have to some of these issues, which I think is great content for a whole nother episode, to be honest.
Absolutely.
But whether it's something that has built up over time, like a pressure cooker, or something that, it usually has always built up over time, but if it's something that has done that, or maybe something, it seems like it just happened overnight. And I'm thinking for a lot of younger people, it might feel more like that second option. Mm-hmm. And I say that because there hasn't been as much time for things to build up. But maybe, they ended up going to school, they took out a couple of student loans. Maybe they didn't even go crazy with that, but they just took out a little bit, and they, can't find a job in their field, for example. And so it's not something that's built up super over time, but if they have the messaging, Nino, and that's so important. You opened up this episode with feeling like, things are just getting so tight and all of that. And I think what's really interesting about that is so many people really feel like things are getting tight, and there are so many people who don't feel that way. And I don't know that it's all just because one group makes a lot more money than the other group. There really is something to the just the way that we see things, the way that we view what's going on. And so if a young kid coming out of school is starting to have that mentality of everything is scarce, nothing is working, that the Eeyore, type of mentality, then chances are it's going to feel a lot more gloomy for them than for the Tigger one who's like, everything's great. I can find a job. And even if I can't find a job, I'll find this one over here. And it does change a little bit of how things happen, the way that we have this outlook, right? So if you've got someone who's come out and they kind of feel more of that gloomy outlook, it might not be something that's built over time, but they might in their heads think, I need to do something now. This is an imminent thing. It's now. And I don't know what to do with that. Maybe they don't have enough information. Maybe they don't have enough training, but their response is to just panic and go, okay, well, I'm going to either take the first job I can find, or I'm going to start opening credit cards right now so I can live, or they're comparing themselves to other people, whatever it is. But I do think that there is a scenario where it has not built up over time, and still there is this response that's a panic response.
Yeah, and I think to your point, that can happen even if somebody is in a situation where maybe they are laid off and maybe they have some savings but not a ton. There's still going to be this oh boy, what do I do?
Yeah.
Deer in the headlights. and which kind of triggers that fight or flight response, right? Because fear has entered the equation. At least uncertainty, and so much uncertainty is rooted in fear, or vice versa. Fear rooted in uncertainty, one way or the other. But that idea that the unknown, the uncertainty, what happens next, can start to stir up fear. And fear, I think the world has told us fear is a great motivator. Maybe there's some truth to that. But what fear does is it often causes us to make hasty decisions we wouldn't otherwise make. And so I think part of what I want to explore with you today too is how can we help and equip our listeners to avoid making hasty decisions. So healthy avoidance. I think there's a better response rather than panic and rather than uncertainty. Some of our values focus on things like knowledge is power and having a plan, right? So here's like a quick little plan on how do I respond in those times of uncertainty, those times that maybe I'll feel a little hasty. And it starts with pausing, right? There is power in the pause. Pause before acting. Go and do some of that information gathering and really get a sense of what the situation is so that you can make intentional decisions, not just decisions that are based out of reaction to the situation, but as a response. There is a difference. You and I talk about words matter. There's a difference between reacting and responding. And I want to encourage and empower our listeners to respond to their situation, not just react to what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all solid. I think the pause is really, really important. I would also throw in there the importance of prayer in that pause. So I think so many times we get that idea of, why is this happening to me? We start questioning, like, why did I get laid off? Why can I not find a job for like that young student or whatever? Why did I lose a spouse? I mean, there's all of these things that could throw somebody into this financial panic, right? And I think so many times when we ask that question, a good reframe for that is, why is this happening for me? And, we know that God makes all things good and that he turns beauty to ashes to beauty. Beauty to ashes. He turns ashes to beauty. And I think sometimes we're in the thick of it. It's so hard to remember that. And so I think that pause is important, but I would really encourage people to be in prayer at that time. Find out, like, Lord, show me what this is for. Help me see this. Because if we skip that part, I think even if we have the pause and we gather the information and we recognize that, we're going to respond versus react, if we're not doing that in accordance with God's will, or with at least a desire to be in accordance with that will, even if we don't understand what it is, then I don't know that those decisions are going to be wise ones anyway. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a couple of different people who are in these seasons of their faith is being tested. And they recognize it. But I think one of the other things they're recognizing for the first time is, instead of riding the waves of when things are good, we'll praise you, Lord, and thank you. When they're bad, we're going to question, well, why did this happen to me? And I really want to just bring some light, some focus to what you said a moment ago. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Asking, why is this happening for me? Because we know that Scripture tells us that trials and tribulations are an opportunity for our character to grow. So the conversation I was having yesterday as these individuals are sharing their situation and how their faith is being tested, I said, let's challenge the perspective by which you're looking at this. And very similarly, not exactly the same, I said, instead of asking God, like, God, why is this happening to me? Start focusing on, God, what do you want me to learn in this season? What growth are you looking for from me? How is it that I need to grow in this season? What do I need to learn so that I become the person that you have created me to be, so that I come into alignment in accordance with his will rather than my own? And I think that's key. So often we are in those situations and we are looking up, but we're looking up and we're asking, why me? Why me? Why now? Why does this have to happen? Rather than, I love that you said, like, during the pause, right? Prayer should be our first order of business, not our last resort. And ask, what can I learn in this season of trials and tribulations? How can my character grow because of what's happening?
Amen.
All right. Power in the pause.
So once we've paused, once we've prayed, it's time to work.
Right. Oh, we can't just sit idly by?
We can't just sit idly by. I mean, I do think that there are certainly ways that we could go. We could just completely not do anything, which is a topic for another day. We could totally, we could decide we're gonna take control back, which I think is a whole different topic. But I think if nothing else, we can ask ourselves, we've done this pause, gather that information and say, okay, what will be a good decision right now? And here's the thing, a lot of times when they say, what's the best one? I think it's important to not get so caught up in what is the best, because if you've got that type of brain that says, well, it's not, I don't know what the best is. And that could absolutely lead to that analysis by paralysis by analysis, right? I've got all these things going in my head and I can't get them right today. But it can lead to just not making a decision at all because it's not the best one. So I'm going to just say right now, don't worry about making the best decision. Just make a good one. Make one that is going to serve your situation well. That's not going to worsen the situation. And then you can make the next best one and the next good one after that. Because I think if we get wrapped up in making the ultimate best decision, we just won't act at all.
As you're sharing that wisdom, it got me thinking about back in 2012 when I was laid off and I started looking at my financial situation differently with a new perspective. Understanding back then I did not have a proper safety net and all these different things. So it was time to make some different decisions. And as you were talking about best versus good, and I'll even just throw in next, right? Just what is the next decision? My wife and I went through a season of let's radically revamp some things. And some of those decisions were really easy ones. Like, hey, we're going to part ways with satellite TV and the $80 or $90 a month that was, whatever the cost was associated with that. But we're going to get away from that, and we're just going to do over-the-air antenna-free television. Okay, so we saved ourselves $80 or $90. Great. That wasn't probably the best financial decision, or meaning it didn't give us the greatest cash flow savings, but it was a good decision. It was the next decision. The next one after that, she didn't like all too much. I think we had like a 2 cell phone plan, and we were probably paying something like $160 a month back then, whatever. And I found that if we went down to one line with a paid for phone, it would be $50 a month. So we could save ourselves $110 a month by sharing a cell phone. This was not my wife's favorite season of our financial situation. But for a season. It wasn't forever, but for a season, we went down to one cell phone. And so that was just the next decision. It wasn't the best one, clearly, because she wasn't a huge fan. But it was a good decision. It helped to free up even more money. And between those two, all of a sudden, we're up to like $200 in cash flow a month. And then that just kind of snowballed into other decisions where it's like, oh, we have 2 cars, but I work from home and you stay home. We don't really need 2 cars. Let's sell one. And so then we got to the bigger things that may have been ideal or best to begin with, but we couldn't start there. We had to start somewhere, and it was easier to start with these little things.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I still remember one of my first couple clients when I work with couples and they're trying to decide how to get rid of something or in what order to get rid of things. I always like to sort of have them go back and forth. So, he gets to choose one and she gets to choose one. And of course they have to be okay together with that, but it gives agency to each of them. And it's not just one person saying, well, let's just get rid of all these things first. And it's not just looking at the numbers, but this couple, it was so funny to me because we got to like the whole idea of cable. You're saying that was super easy. Of course we'll just watch free TV. That was like the last thing that this couple was willing to get rid of. Like we went through all of these other things and finally he's like, fine, I guess. Because it was his turn, right? It was his turn in we're going to go back and forth. And it was like that or food. He's like, I guess we'll get rid of that one. And it was just kind of funny to see. And I mean, they were okay because it was all just for a season. They didn't have to get rid of it forever, but it was just funny. So what I share that because that was your first, it was his last. And so it just goes to show you that everybody has different priorities. And so it's okay to make different decisions. That's why we do what we do.
Yep, absolutely. And so what we just talked about really ties into what I had for our Ask the Coaches segment. Number of different posts, and really what they're asking is like, how do we know what to cut first? And I think it's more about like what we just talked about. Different priorities for different people, and cut something. It might not be the biggest cut, right? Where maybe you're saving $100, $200 a month. But if you cut a little here and a little there, you get this snowball effect. And all of a sudden you look up and you freed up $200 worth of cash flow because you've started to identify things that it's like, we don't need these things. And I really want to emphasize for a season. The decisions you are going to make today financially are not for the rest of your life. It's not that you can never have a streaming service ever again, but maybe right now, the 7 streaming services you have, you don't really need. Maybe there's only one that you're actually using, so you can cancel 6 of them for a season and free up some of that cash flow.
Mm-hmm. I think as you're saying that, it comes to me that that's true. And you may decide or discover, discover is probably a better word there. You don't even like those 6 that you ended up getting rid of, and that you really are better off without those things, and that you decided that, oh, I'm actually really good at art, or I really enjoy reading. Because when we are thrust into something different and we're kind of forced to try new things, it's amazing what you can discover. And you mentioned earlier, Nino, about, becoming the person that God created you to be. This is a really good opportunity to do just that, because you're shaking up your stale routine. And so many times we do things because society tells us, of course you got to do that. Like, why wouldn't you have 5 different social media things? I was just at church the other day, actually, with this young gentleman. And he was saying that, for Lent, one of the things that he gave up was social media. And so we were having this side conversation. I don't even know him that well, but I talk to people that I don't know well. And he was saying, I said, technically you can end that fast. And he's like, so I could jump on social media right now. I said, you could, but do you really want to? Like, what did you discover over the last 3 months, It's like, well, I don't really need it. I don't even enjoy it that much. I'm like, yes, like that's what these fasts are for, is to realize that you started the behavior in the first place under either false pretenses, or maybe it was something good that you started, but all of a sudden it just became stale and it's no longer serving you. It's no longer serving God. And so it's time to just like, bye, see you later. And so it was just a really neat conversation. And I think that, I agree with you, Nino, that it is for a season, but how beautiful when you recognize, actually, I'm good. Like, this is so much better than what I was doing before, and to have that realization. So I just wanted to encourage our listeners not to give something up thinking, entirely, oh, I'm going to give it up, but I get to get it back. Give yourself, give your soul, give your spirit a little bit of grace there and go, I'm curious. Like, what does God have in store for me when I don't have this thing in my life?
I love that. Yeah. When I got rid of the satellite dish, I knew it was for a season. I couldn't wait. Well, it's not that I couldn't wait, but I was like, I was maybe counting down the days of, because I'm a sports fan. And so, I wanted sports TV and all that stuff. And as I'm reflecting all these years later, that was 2012. And I went back for a season to watching all that. But my consumption of sports today is wildly different than it was 12, 14 years ago. And for the better, right? If I'm being 100% honest, here's a little bit of insight. It was an idol in my life. And I had to recognize that it was an idol in my life. And it made me, not that it made me, I behaved in ways that disgust myself when I consumed sports too often. And I was like, I don't like that. So, Lord, change me, because I don't like it. And if I don't like it, and I'm a fallen, imperfect human, I can only imagine how much more you're like, yeah, that's not who I created you to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would just say, look at this as an opportunity to discover some of those things.
Yeah. I love that. Discover it. So that takes us to our challenge for the week. Our challenge for the week is to practice pause. And in that pause, first pray to see what you might discover, and then take action.
Challenge accepted.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Christ-Centered Stewardship Podcast. Follow us on your favorite social media platform for more encouragement and support. And until next time, may the Lord keep you in perfect peace as you set your sight on Jesus.